November 22nd, 1963. A bright Texas afternoon, a cheering crowd, and a smiling president waving from the back of an open limousine. In seconds, that optimism turned into one of the darkest moments in American history. Shots rang out in Dealey Plaza, and the world changed forever. To this day, the assassination of John F. Kennedy remains a story of mystery, controversy, and unanswered questions. Was it truly the work of one man, or the beginning of something much larger? Kennedy's presidency before Dallas. Before that fateful day in Dallas, John F. Kennedy had already lived through some of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. His presidency began with embarrassment, the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, where CIA-backed Cuban exiles were crushed in their attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro. But Kennedy quickly rebounded, facing down the Soviets in the Cuban Missile Crisis, a standoff that brought the world to the edge of nuclear war. He pushed for a nuclear test ban treaty, set up a direct hotline with Moscow, and stood before the Berlin Wall declaring, "Ich bin ein Berliner." At home, however, Kennedy was just as polarizing. His support for civil rights angered Southern Democrats, especially in Texas, where party leaders were bitterly divided. To win re-election in 1964, he needed to mend those fractures and prove that even a skeptical Texas could rally behind him. That's why he planned a whirlwind tour of the state, one that would tragically become his last. The Texas trip. On November 21st, 1963, Air Force One touched down in Texas. Kennedy wasn't just visiting, he was on a mission. Texas was critical to his re-election hopes, but it was also a divided battleground. Party leaders were at odds, and many Texans distrusted his stance on civil rights and foreign policy. Winning them over meant showing up in person. The next morning, in Fort Worth, Kennedy delivered what would be the final speeches of his life. At a breakfast hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce, he spoke of America's strength and dangers ahead, declaring, "This is a very dangerous and uncertain world. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it." Hours later, those words would carry an eerie weight. From there, the President, First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, and their Texas hosts prepared for the motorcade through Dallas. Crowds were expected to be huge, tens of thousands lining the streets, eager to see the young president and his glamorous wife. Kennedy needed this trip to unite a fractured political base. But what awaited him in Dallas would do the opposite, splitting the nation's trust for generations. The motorcade in Dallas. By late morning, Air Force One had landed at Dallas Love Field. The President and First Lady stepped off the plane to a roar of excitement. Jacqueline Kennedy, dressed in her iconic pink suit and pillbox hat, charmed the crowd as they shook hands before climbing into the open-top Lincoln limousine. Beside them sat Texas Governor John Connally and his wife, Nellie. As the motorcade wound through the streets, the turnout was overwhelming. An estimated 200,000 people lined the route, waving flags and cheering as the presidential car passed. The mood was electric, almost celebratory. At one point, Nellie Connally turned to the president and said with pride, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Kennedy smiled and replied, "No, you certainly can't." They were his last recorded words. Moments later, as the motorcade approached Dealey Plaza, the optimism of that morning would shatter in an instant. The assassination, 12:30 p.m. Dealey Plaza, the presidential limousine turned onto Elm Street, moving past the Grassy Knoll and toward the Texas School Book Depository. Then, suddenly, the sound of gunfire split the air. The first bullet struck President Kennedy in the neck, passing through his throat and into Governor Connally, who screamed as his shoulder and wrist shattered. A second shot tore into Kennedy's head with devastating force, spraying fragments across the limousine and onto the agents in the car behind. Jacqueline Kennedy, in shock, tried desperately to hold her husband as the motorcade erupted into chaos. Secret Service agents shouted, ducked, and leapt into action. The driver slammed the accelerator, racing toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. But within minutes, doctors confirmed what many already feared. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was dead. The hunt for the killer. While the nation reeled in shock, Dallas police scrambled to find the shooter. Inside the Texas School Book Depository, officers discovered a rifle stashed near a sixth-floor window, with shell casings scattered on the floor. Witnesses swore they had seen a man in that very window as the shots were fired. That man was Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine who had been working in the building for barely a month. Within minutes of the shooting, Oswald slipped out, boarded a bus, then switched to a taxi, vanishing into the city. At his boarding house, he picked up a pistol and coat before heading back into the streets. Not long after, he crossed paths with Officer J.D. Tippit, who matched him to the suspect's description. In broad daylight, Oswald gunned the policeman man down and fled on foot. His escape ended inside the Texas Theater, where alert citizens had noticed his erratic behavior. Surrounded by police, Oswald was dragged from his seat and arrested. But questions came quickly. Why had he purchased the rifle under the alias A.J. Hidell? And why did Army intelligence keep a mysterious file on that name? One that was conveniently destroyed before investigators could see it. Oswald's murder. For 2 days, Oswald sat in custody, denying any role in the president's assassination. He told reporters, "I'm just a patsy," but the evidence against him seemed overwhelming. The rifle, the pistol, the eyewitness accounts. Everything pointed to him. Then on the morning of November 24th, as cameras rolled live for millions of Americans, the unthinkable happened again. While Oswald was being transferred from city jail to the county jail, a figure pushed through the crowd of police and reporters. Suddenly, a revolver flashed, and a single shot struck Oswald in the abdomen. The shooter was Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner with ties to the underworld. He claimed he acted out of sympathy, saying he wanted to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the pain of a public trial. But his sudden attack, in full view of the nation, only deepened the suspicion. If Oswald was the lone assassin, why was he silenced before he could ever stand trial? Aftermath and the Warren Commission. The nation mourned as Kennedy's body was laid to rest on November 25, 1963. His funeral drew leaders from over 100 countries, watched by millions glued to their televisions. The young president's death left America shaken, not only by grief, but by a haunting question. Why had he been killed? President Lyndon B. Johnson quickly created a special panel, the Warren Commission, to investigate. After months of hearings, its final report landed in September 1964. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. He fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, and Jack Ruby, too, had acted alone when he killed Oswald. Case closed, but the public wasn't convinced. Witnesses swore they heard gunfire from the Grassy Knoll. Others pointed to the improbability of Oswald's cheap, unreliable rifle striking 2 deadly hits at a moving target. Still more wondered why so many files tied to the case mysteriously vanished. The commission declared there was no conspiracy, but for millions, the doubts never died. Conclusion: the assassination of John F. Kennedy was more than the death of a president. It was the shattering of America's innocence. In just a few seconds, the country lost its leader, its sense of security, and, for many, its trust in government. The Warren Commission gave its verdict, but decades later, questions still echo. Was it really the work of a lone gunman, or the shadow of something far bigger, something the public was never meant to know? One thing is certain: November 22nd, 1963, changed history forever. The echoes of that day still haunt Dealey Plaza, and the mystery of who truly killed JFK may never be fully resolved. What do you believe? Was Lee Harvey Oswald the lone assassin, or just a patsy in a much larger plot? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them all. And if you want more untold stories of history's biggest mysteries, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next.